All right. Should be going. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing great. It is Tuesday, March 18th. I'm coming through 5x5. Look it up if you don't know what that is. Thanks for being here live with me. And if you are watching it later, thanks for watching it later. I appreciate that too. I don't have any guests today, so you're going to get to hear just from me. My name is Anthony Horvath, Dr. Anthony Horvath, if you are so inclined, some sort of philosophy degree or something or another. Long story behind that, but what I'm going to be talking about today, the NSSM-200, the National Security Memo, get the letters right, was part of what I spent quite a bit of time researching. It's been it's a huge topic, and it's like many of the other things that we've talked about so far in my podcast. There's more that I can possibly say in an hour and a half. But I will say I welcome questions or comments as we go on. And if someone comes in and wants to even join as a guest, even at the last minute, send me a text if you're able, if you are someone who has that, and we can get that set up too. So let's just kind of get right into it. There's a lot. You see that transition? Oh, snazzy, right? I'm starting to get it. So let's just start with Elon Musk. So Elon Musk has for quite some time been calling attention to the falling birth rate and the TFR, total fertility rate, in America, and pointing out that it has civilizational implications, which of course it does. And he's been warning against it. Now, I'm not going to say that Elon is the guy who we should be looking at for all insight into healthy childbearing philosophies, we'll say. But he's right about this. He's right that a falling fertility, a falling birth rate is going to cause more problems than it solves. But what I don't think he realizes, and I say this based on having seen many of his posts, he's never talked about how the fertility rate that we're observing is actually largely the result of policies that were put in place by the federal government in the 1970s and the 1980s. And so it is like not an accident. It was engineered. And we're going to talk about that, because I think that if you don't unravel the causes of the population decline, then you're not really, there's no way really you'd be able to reverse it, even if you wanted to. You can appeal to people, you can try to persuade them, perhaps, but I think what they really need to hear first and foremost is that I don't know who they is in this scenario suddenly, they've been manipulated. It's engineered. So let's just say hypothetically, you are a person who wants 1.5 children. You want to get married, have 1.5 children. Now, why? Why do you want to have 1.5 children? What's the rationale? Is it so that you could use half of the kid as a paperweight? That's one option, I suppose. But what the story of NSSM-200 tells us, or shows us, is that decision about how many children you want to have is in fact one of the things that they wanted to influence. I set out a bunch of books that I'm going to be talking about today. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about all of them, but there's one that maybe I should have set out. There's a nice quote in there by Clarence Gamble's son. It's the book is the biography of Clarence Gamble. You know, the Gamble of Procter and Gamble, and what he used a lot of his money to do was to create a safe and effective birth control pill for women. And his son writes in the foreword that the problem that they were finding in the 70s was not that people could not have was not unwanted children, although that was always the mantra. You know, we should not have unwanted children. Hence the idea of Planned Parenthood, right? What Margaret Sanger's organization was renamed. His Clarence Gamble's son pointed out the problem was that families wanted too many children, and they had to find a way to basically talk them out of it, persuade them out of it. So there's going to be a lot of points in this conversation that I could very easily see would be controversial to a lot of people. They might be really offended that I would bring it up, and I'm not gonna, even though I have my own viewpoints, I'm not going to try to necessarily say to anyone that this is good or this is bad. I'm just going to say it wasn't your decision. It should have been your decision. You should have been making it on your own. A good case in point, as we get into this, the topic of abortion, so we'll just get real controversial right from the beginning, is it goes out of its way to say that you can't get population control, you can't get your population size in control unless a country resorts to abortion. So setting aside the question of whether or not you think you should have a right to abortion, the question would be, if you want to get an abortion, was that your idea, or were there a bunch of old white men in a committee room somewhere in Washington, D.C. that contrived circumstances so that you would think you would want an abortion? So that's kind of bad to me. I think that's bad. And I think people would generally agree with me that those kinds of things are bad when the system is rigged in order to get the outcomes that the system wants, but make it seem like the individual is actually making their choices, their free choices. So yeah, so I'm not going to try to be insensitive. I think there is some common ground here, but you're going to have to forgive me if I get a little bit carried away, because I really don't like these people. In fact, I hate them. In fact, there's a really good chance that I might end up swearing a lot. I really don't like them. Okay, so here's the document. Let's just give you the quick overview, and then I'm going to give you some background. NSSM-200, subtitle, Implications of Worldwide Population Growth for U.S. Security and Overseas Interests, the 1974 National Security Study Memorandum, which I believe is the name that they themselves gave it. Yes. Came out in 74. It was Nixon authorized Kissinger, Henry Kissinger. Everyone loves him, right? To have a study about the national security implications of overpopulation, and then come up with solutions and or recommendations, we'll say. And that they did. They studied it, and they came up with some suggestions. And Nixon promptly did nothing with it. He's like, I'm not touching that hot potato. And of course, in 74, Nixon had other hot potatoes he was dealing with. So this one was just put on standby. But Gerald Ford signed it. He put it into law with some sort of, I don't think they would call it an executive order, but it's in this. It is National Security Decision Memorandum 314, November 1975. And by the way, you can get this on the website, my website, thegutenbookpress.com. And I should also mention that I created a website about this. I feel so strongly about it. So I'll be showing you that a little bit later too. So anyway, Nixon didn't implement it, even though he commissioned it. Gerald Ford began to put it into practice. Jimmy Carter accelerated it. And under Reagan, things started to get a little bit murky about whether or not it was still federal policy or not. So I would like to know if it's still federal policy. Probably it is not. Probably what happened was all the big money that was the top line focus on let's make this happen as a public policy that we're proud of. That went away, and it was replaced by individuals who still shared the ideas and the ideals of the people who made it in the first place. And they stayed in their federal positions, and they continued to carry out the agenda silently and quietly. So what was that agenda? I'm just giving you a top level, real quick summary of the document at this point. Recommendations were you've got to get women into the workplace, because if women are working, they're not probably going to have as many children. And obviously lots and lots of contraception, family planning, and those kinds of things. And in the back burner was the idea, and it's actually in here, like, what are we going to do if it doesn't work? What if we can't reduce the population well enough? And then you've got things like compulsory sterilization and things like that. So we're living with this today. And let me just show a chart here, which I ought to have handy. I've got everything kind of ready here. Let's see, not that one. Okay, where'd it go? Seriously, I had them all ready. Well, I'll just reopen it, and then I don't have to worry about it. So this is essentially the trend that Musk is referring to. And this also forms the backdrop of what the folks who wrote this National Security Study Memorandum were thinking about as well. You can see on the left that in the 1800s, 7 kids per family. And then it went down and down and down. And then everyone can see where the baby boom is in there, right? That's pretty easy to see. And right around, you can see, I don't know if you're able to see my mouse cursor. I need like a pointer. At the 1970 mark, it's still at like 2.5. And this apparently was ungodly high. This is horrible. 2.5 kids per family. We're all going to die. Yeah. We'll get into why they thought that. But the trajectory overall, you could see they had the same data, that in general, the fertility rate was already falling by itself. But then now here we have Elon Musk coming along, pointing out that we're well below replacement rate. So replacement rate is pretty easy. If you got a man and a woman, and they're going to have kids, and you want to at least meet the replacement rate, they need to have at least 2 kids, right? So if they only have 1.5 kids, the population is going to trend down. And you can see, I'm going to zoom this up here so that you can see it here. We are we're like 1.7. So over time, the population is going to get smaller all on its own at this point, which is precisely what the population controllers of the 1970s wanted. But there are problems. Let's just start with one. The Social Security was set up in, oh man, I should have found a way to, so you guys can see my cursor. I wonder if there's a way to make a change real quick to make that possible. All right, whatever. I should make like a little arrow. So Social Security was in the 1930s, going into the 1940s, and it was based on always having at least, a birth rate of 2.5 to support the next people who would come, the older people who would age out. And if you're thinking that sounds like a Ponzi scheme, it's the government, so I guess it's different or something. But the problem is then the baby boomers came, and the whole math for Social Security got blown up. Obviously, initially there was no problem. I'm putting my cursor over the area, and you can't even see it. You can see that peak there, right? In those years, Social Security was doing just fine. Well, now all those people are retiring, and their payments have to be financed from the people on the far right side here, the ones who are at either replacement rate of 2 or below, TFR 1.7. So clearly you can see that this math is not going to work. It might have worked if the population had stayed 2.5 to 3, but now it's going to get tight. It's going to get real tight. And there's a lot of other implications too. But the point is, the bottom line is, when we're dealing with these population controllers, they're smart people in their own way, but they're also just effing stupid. Like, it never even occurs to them when you read through this. Like, I don't know. I don't want, like, there's one point here where they make it. I'll get to it later. They say, well, what are we going to do about this study to get rid of all the people? And before they'd even done the study, like, they'd already assumed that there was overpopulation. It never crossed their mind that we could have underpopulation, and so they made no provision for that. It never occurred to them that you could set up institutions in departments or society based on your population at this level and have it go down. Which is weird because they wanted it to go down. That was their whole point. So I'm going to say, just to get my own feelings out of the way, I would lean very strongly on the libertarian side, and I just don't think the government should be involved in this one way or the other. Just get them out. The people who are doing these things, they're almost always wrong. If they're ever right, it's like the whole broken clock is right twice a day kind of thing. They're messing with people's lives, and they're doing it with billions of dollars. Hey, I have opinions on these things too, but you don't see me trying to corral entire curriculums and thrust them onto 100 million elementary school kids. You know what I'm saying, Vern? All right, who knows that one? I just dated myself on that one, didn't I? Anyway, so let's get rid of this one. Hey, Vern. And let's look at another one, because this is not just in our country here. The same thing's happening around the world. Even in Asia, which was the other example I was going to give of when you start messing with population because you think you're so smart, China enforced its one-child policy, and unfortunately, they didn't think about the fact that if families were only allowed to have one kid, they would only ever have boys, and they would kill the girls, or sometimes like take them out and throw them into the woods, but maybe abort them, and then one generation later, there's one woman for every 5 guys, and now you've got a problem in China, and you've got to find some extra women, and there's other issues, and so now China is trying to fix that. They revoked their one-child policy quite a few years ago now, but they still can't get people to reproduce. And why? Because they spent 30 or 40 years just drilling into people's heads that they should only have one child, and that's what everyone thinks. And so how do you get them to reverse it? It's not an easy thing, and other nations have had trouble with this as well. So this is not just an American problem. It is all over the world as nations struggle with these population decline. Population declines, yes. So what I'm going to do here, and again, if you've got questions or comments as I go, please feel free to submit them. That would be for the best. I mentioned a little bit ago that I actually created a website for this, NSSM-200. When I started studying this about 12 years ago now, I was shocked to find out that there was no printed edition of NSSM-200, and so I printed it, and what you see there is mine. It's my book. Okay, so now you get the full backstory. If I can just get this thing to work. Where'd you go? Jamie, hey, get this going. Stupid. So this is from my website, NSSM200.com. And it looks like you're going to have trouble reading it. So let me just fix that real quick. There we go. So you can find links to buy this on Amazon from there, and it's a public domain book or file. You can download it as well if you really want. So we're going to go back in time here, because I don't think you can really appreciate the full scope and scale of what the population engineers tried to do in the 70s without understanding the full backstory. So you can see there, I start with Malthus. Does everyone know who Malthus is? So another book that I publish. Find it on gutenbergpress.com. Malthus basically is the guy who made popular the idea that the pie is only so big, and conflict arises as everyone competes for these resources. And so Malthus believed that when populations grew, inevitably they would come into competition with other populations for important resources, and then they would kill each other. Seems plausible, I suppose. Although it seems to me that there's always been other reasons for why people might kill each other. But he basically felt that like the underlying reason was overpopulation. Now, personally, I can't quite square that. Like Genghis Khan, you know, he had plenty of room to spread his elbows. You know what I'm saying? But for some reason, he still wanted all of Asia. You know, they wanted Iran, they wanted Rome, they sacked everything. And I just don't think it was for lack of space. I'm just saying. But Malthus was pretty confident that it had to do with population. And he had a mathematical way of putting it, and this is kind of the important part of this. Essentially, he argued that the populations grow exponentially, right? 2 people can become 4 people, can become 8 people, that kind of thing. But that doesn't happen with our resources. It's linear. You can't take 2 pieces of iron and smash them together and get 4. No matter what you do, you're still only going to have 2 pieces of iron. Just stay with me here. And so as the population grows exponentially, then the competition becomes really intense and inevitable. And so something that has to intervene. It usually would be a war, or it could be a plague, it could be a famine, things of that sort. And it's really ironic, I think, that he was writing this in 1798, when I don't know how many people there were. Well, I have a chart that will show us here really soon, but it was a lot less than we have now. So there's that. So this guy here, Malthus, is quoted in probably every book that I have over here to cite from, but it's quoted also. He's quoted in this one too. So 1798 may seem like forever ago to y'all, or if we've got like some sort of millennial who's watching, some guy who was born in, I don't know, 2008. He's just hitting 20. Some guy like that. The year 1800 might seem so far away that it could never possibly have an impact on things today. And yet, the people who set the public policy for our reproduction right now, which they did 40, 50 years ago, were quoting Malthus. Well, they didn't quote Malthus. They referred to him. Approvingly, of course. Because it was presented as math, and as everyone knows, math is undeniable. It's science. If the equation says it, it must be true. If you have a pie, I'm talking about like a food pie, you're only going to get so much out of it no matter what. You can come up with whatever equations that you want. You're never going to have more pie. Every x plus y will always equal pi, not 3.14, etc., etc. The food that we eat, right? And because of that mentality, because of that attitude, and because of the way that he presented it as like just simple, raw, objective, impartial science, it took hold as, who could possibly refute this? And a lot of people accepted it just on those terms. Ironically, Malthus would spend pretty much the rest of his life revising his book because he received so many criticisms from different places, that the original book, which is what I publish, is a lot easier and shorter to read than the later ones. In Darwin, we're not going to make this about Darwin, I hope. Darwin actually was inspired by Malthus for his own theory. And that's not conjecture. He says it in his journals. He explicitly says, I was reading Malthus, and finally I figured it out. You've got a certain amount of population. They can't all get the same amount of resources. You can follow the math from there, right? And then I'm going quick through time here. Then the eugenicists came. These are my favorite people. I mentioned before that I have the graduate degree, the postdoc or whatever, terminal degree. And my dissertation was on evolutionary ethics. Good stuff. And the eugenicists were right in the midst of what I researched. But the other stuff came up because what happened was after World War II, the eugenics people were extremely discredited, and so they had to fall back to something else, something that was, and they wouldn't give up their ideas, of course. So they had to find something that was more respectable, and they fell back to the overpopulation stuff. But I'm coming back to that. Let's go back to the eugenicists for a minute. The one thing about the era of that the eugenicists were, prominent in, is the progressive era. And this is I think a very important part of the story here, because move this over just a shade. So during the progressive era, there was all these utopian tales, and there was widespread belief, it was the progressive era, that the humanity had finally reached a point where they would be able to master everything, master science, and master politics too, so that they would be able to finally create the perfect administrative state. Everything was going to be great in the world. You're going to finally have world peace. But of course, that meant you had to take control of things like reproduction, because at that same time, the evolutionary, they were just coming to grips with genetics and how that worked, and they realized that the great success of civilization was allowing some people to live who in previous generations would have died. And now those people, those trash people, those disabled people, those senile people, the idiots, the morons, that's their term. These are scientific terms in 1910. Not kidding, right? The moron, that's a real term. The jukes during the era, and so there was a real problem. What do you do with these people who, in a better, a healthier, more robust time, would have been eliminated by natural selection? And so now the population was exploding, as it were, slow in its own way. But it wasn't just, you weren't getting great members of the population. It was getting bigger, but it was getting full of idiots and defective people, and everything was degenerating. And that's why heading into the era of the Nazi Germany thing, which a couple weeks ago, maybe it was even last week, I did something about the Nazi T4 project, because the deterioration of the race, that was a thing that they were really concerned about, because from their point of view, they were on the verge of creating the perfect world government. So close. And they had all these things to start. So they had all these things that they had to iron out, and these defective people were one of them. There were others as well. And then, of course, World War I kind of wrecked a whole lot of the optimism that they had. It makes sense, right? And a lot of people who had high hopes for the utopian world state began to have other thoughts. And then you had World War II, right? Remember, World War I was the Great War, the war to end all wars. That's actually what they called it. Isn't that funny? I mean, tragically funny. So then World War II comes along, and now that's like the final nail in the coffin for any kind of utopian, progressive hope that the state is going to become this great and wonderful thing, and everyone's going to live happily ever after, and we'll find a solution to the defectives and the unemployables and things of that sort. That all went away. you could, for obvious reasons, you couldn't go around telling people or saying out loud in any kind of a public setting. You couldn't say, you've got a birth defect. You should die. Probably that would really help because we've got limited resources. Haven't you read your Malthus? We can't have all our limited resources going for genetic deteriorated fools like you. Although there were a few that actually did do that, advocating for infanticide up to even the age of 5. It's crazy stuff. That could be another topic for another day. That one, I think, was in 1955, I think. OJ, what do they say on the internet now, more or less? Just because there's that delay. I should have increased the latency to make it more immediate. This awkward moment brought to you by OJ Wolf Smasher, who is now madly typing because he knows that everybody's waiting to hear what he has to say. But I'm going to say that this was my fault, OJ. I have the option to make it so that it's that the chat is almost completely aligned, and I just kind of went with me, and I just keep forgetting to do it. I'll let him continue to dribble that out and come back to it in a second. So after World War II, they fell back to self-unmartinizing, commit self-un. I'm not a smart man, but I don't know what that means. Well, we worked that out. Can't say the actual word. So he's being subtle. I'm supposed to know what it is. Must be because I'm a man. I can't do two things at once. I'm doing the podcast, and just looking to my left is, yeah, all right. I'm picking up what you're laying, but for some reason I can't quite get what you're talking about. But it's like I said, it's because okay, all right. So we'll just leave that to the chat. Unlifing. Okay, got it. Unmartinizing. Anyway, thank you for the comment. Please give me another comment. I know I handled this one in a most unprofessional way, and I apologize. And the producer in charge of this segment will be sacked. Okay. So, when everything went away, when the eugenics stuff went away, when the outright Malthusianism stuff, when it got how do I put it? The optimism was gone. The hope was gone, and people were resigned to the fact that they were going to have to find an entirely different way to craft their arguments, and even just simply to base their arguments. I think I'm now finally catching up with what you're saying like 2 minutes later. And so they went back to Malthus, basically, because Malthus it's fairly tame, really. It's just math. There's no racism to it or anything like that. It's just too many people, not enough resources, just math, just science, right? And so as we go through here, now one of the reasons why I show the books, it's not just to brag about the size of my library. That wasn't a euphemism, by the way. These are some of the books that I'm going to be doing, is because I want people to watch this to know, if they can tell already, that I have researched these things. I've actually studied them, and I've actually acquired the sources. I didn't just read a Google page. I didn't go on Wikipedia and see what I could do. I went to the primary sources as much as possible. And so I think it's useful for people to know that. That doesn't mean that I get everything right, but it does mean that it's an informed opinion that you should perhaps give at least a little bit of credibility to if you have not yet yourself done the research. So anyway, Guy Irving Birch. I got it. Right here. Yep. Okay. So he basically he brushed off his Malthus. This is he actually wrote this, I believe. I wonder if I say it in the 1920. No, that's when he founded the population reference. So 1945. So just as the war was ending, and he's once again he's bringing out this idea that there's too many people. And when you have too many people, you have war, famine, plague, these sorts of things. So getting rid of people is the humanitarian thing to do. Right? If you love humans, you want less of them. That's the Birch attitude. That's the attitude of all these people. If you really cared about people, you'd kill them all. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, so I mentioned Birch because he was like one of the first, but he inspired others. That's why I'm going through this here. He inspired Fairfield Osborn book. Oh, I skipped a guy. He's the next one. Where is it? Here it is. Fairfield Osborn. Yeah. And you can see from the description, if you wanted to take the time to read that he was connected to Frederick Osborn, who is an explicit eugenicist. And he had his own take. He advocated for basically guerrilla eugenics. And I don't want to get it off onto that tangent. But the point is that in the 70s, Frederick Osborn would actually say, there's a quote, that the legalization of abortion was the single best, had the potential to be one of the single greatest advancements in eugenics ever. So just think about that the next time you think about abortion on demand. Think about one of the founders of the American Eugenics Society observing that abortion was a great tool and would prove to be a great tool for eugenics. It's his argument, not mine. William Vogt. Now we get into Planned Parenthood. That's this one. Road to Survival. And now we're getting into the realm of the people and the institutions that we're most familiar with. Because obviously Planned Parenthood is still with us today, right? So it's useful to think about what the attitudes are of the people who created our institutions, I think. But all these people, they're framing these things not in racial terms, but just as simple math. And that's how they're making their arguments. I'm going to skip over some of these people here to get me to the 60s. Yes, the 60s. So in the 60s, this was all just going crazy at this point. And every now and then I have a chance to talk to some people who were kids during that time. And they remember these things. Now, I mean, I talk to people who are kids at that time, but it's not very often that you get in a conversation with a 70 or 80-year-old and you have the opportunity to talk about, the population control commercials and stuff that they saw in the 60s in their childhood. You know what I'm saying? But this became a huge deal. We can't I can't convey in this brief amount of time just how immersed everybody was in this. Everything was interpreted and seen through the prism of overpopulation. Because obviously there was lots of wars in the 60s, right? There was lots of things, lots of reasons, lots of pretexts for people to interpret through the lens of the pie is only so big, through the Malthusian lens, we'll say. And so I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. So first, one of the a great popularizer of these ideas was Paul Ehrlich, and this book, The Population Bomb, would be a really great example. This was 1969, and I'll just read the first line here. The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s and 1980s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death, in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. So it's too late, Jim. We're toast. There's nothing we can do. We're all going to die. Now, I don't know what your experience was of the 70s and 80s. I was a little young for the 70s, but I was awake for the 80s, and there were people that were dying. Don't get me wrong. It certainly happened. But it wasn't the kind of catastrophe that he was talking about. But I mentioned him first because he was a repeated guest on the Johnny Carson show. He was there a lot. He was in newspaper articles. I mean, I'm telling you, like, this stuff was all over the place. And the academics were going crazy too. Check this out. Here's a great one. Here's a guy who maybe the racial element, he really wished he could bring out a little bit. Breeding ourselves to death. Yeah, it's a good one, right? You just know you want to read that one. Good stuff right there. But maybe it's a little, a little subtle. I mean, if only someone could tell us what they think the real problem is. Like this guy and his wife. There's just too many Americans. These are the academics, right? Yeah, I read all these. Sad, sad nights. So, heading into the 1970s then, or late 1960s, we'll say, Nixon was now the president. And he was a Republican, but he was part of the milieu. It was the zeitgeist. It was that was he just I read a lot about that era, and including a fair bit about Nixon, and I don't recall anything really jumping out that says that made me think that, oh, here's a closet eugenicist, or here's a guy who really wants to get down with the whole overpopulation thing. But he was amenable to what the experts were saying. He trusted their judgment, and in 1969, he gave a speech on how there's basically too many people, and he called on Congress to pass a law. It's Title 10. You see it there. And a lot of people don't know this, but it's still in existence today. And look at the name of this thing. Family Planning Services and Population Research Act of 1970. We've still got it. It's still here. The all the controversy about uh, boys going into girls' bathrooms or competing in girls' sports, that was all done under Title X, right? There's an organization which, a federal agency, which I think I saw was in here. Yeah, the Office of Population Affairs. It still exists. They have a website. Check it out. Now, in the old days, they were very, very overt about what their mission was. Like in the early, late 60s, and well, I suppose this actual law didn't come into effect to the 70s, but they were saying basically, hey, please, thank you for consulting our resources. We hope that you'll cut off your wiener so you won't have children. No, they wouldn't say that, but they were really, really like in your face. Hey, there's too many people. Do your part. Try not to have any kids. That's all we were really asking. Okay. So this is still here. This is still going on. So it's Nixon that did this. One of the other things that he did, besides creating a whole federal agency with the purpose of reducing the size of America's population, see, I don't think Elon Musk knows that. I've never seen him say anything about that. I'm just saying, this seems to me like if you are interested and concerned about the trajectory of the fertility rate, then you ought to know this thing. And it's so ironic, too, because Musk is in charge of Doge, and he's in there slicing and slashing and going after the USAID, which was historically like the cutting edge. It was the weapon by which these policies were implemented. And yet he still hasn't really said anything about the actual agenda, the actual policy agenda. It was not hidden. It's not a conspiracy. You can find Nixon's speech right now. Title X is in this act, the Family Planning Act. It's in the Federal Registry. No conspiracy whatsoever. So I think you should know about that if you're if you're really concerned about this. So slight digression to get back on track, so we can understand exactly what policies were put into place that we're dealing with now. So one of the first things that he did was he commissioned the Rockefeller Commission on Population. This is John D. Rockefeller. Yes, I have this too. Don't try to gaslight me into saying that I don't know what I'm talking about, or it's not really what you think it is, because I've read the books. I read the materials. I've seen them in their own words say these things. I'm like Rush Limbaugh. I know them like the glorious, my glorious back of my own right hand. I forget what Rush used to say. Someone find it for me. Anyway, so this was like so it was an important moment in the population control movement, because they're now finally getting the federal they're getting the weight of the federal government, all that money, all the bureaucracies, all the agencies, all the people who are going to be coming into this. And there had been throughout this period in the 1950s and the 1960s, many rich people who had tried to do their best to reduce the population, to try to influence the population control discussion. John D. Rockefeller of the Rockefeller family, you've heard of him. I already talked about Clarence Gamble of Procter & Gamble, that family. Two examples, the guy who made the inventor of the Dixie Cup. It'll come to me later. He actually commissioned a whole bunch of newspaper ads, which I have in one of my books. I almost wonder if they're in one of these books. I do, yeah. So I don't know. I guess I don't know for sure if this is one of the same ads, but This is the kind of ad for sure. Yeah, so the Dixie Cup guy, his name will come to me a little bit later, 3 a.m. while I'm sleeping deep, and I'll sit up. Oh yeah. Anyway, but these rich people did not have enough money to do what they wanted to do, because what they wanted to do was to take a world population of 4 billion and make it 2 billion. And yeah, they're billionaires, but they need the money, and they need the coercive powers of the state. Lawrence Llewellyn? That does not sound familiar. Are you sure about that last name? I'd hate to have gotten this one wrong. I can always post it in the comments. Maybe it wasn't the Dixie Cup guy. Let's see here. Maybe this book tells me here. Nobody really cares. Google says so. Yeah, okay, so that might be the Dixie Cup guy, I guess, maybe, but it's not the guy who funded these ads. Let me just see if there's a table of contents that has it. Lawrence Llewellyn. All my favorite people. Yeah, so the first part of this, there's William Vogt, Fairfield Osborne, Rockefellers. This book is all in favor of these people, by the way. I'll track it down. Maybe I'll even track it down when I have a chance before I sign off here. So what they wanted to do could not be done on their own resources. That's the point. And so when when Nixon began to hear them out, and he commissioned this report, they were ecstatic, and they just really began to pile on with ideas, and it was like, you know how like if you're like sitting around shooting the breeze with people, and you come up with this wild and crazy idea, like, hey, I got an idea. Let's coat ourselves in oil and then light ourselves on fire and then run around a track and see how bright we are and if people will call the cops. And everyone has a good laugh about it. And everyone laughs about it for a while. And then, I don't know, maybe after 3 drinks, 10 drinks, suddenly people are starting to coat themselves with oil. And you're like, okay, it's getting real now, right? Well, so that would be bad, I think. For these people, it was good. It's like, oh, this is getting real now. We've got to come up with some serious proposals, because we now have people who are going to put them into place. And there's a name that I skipped over, Jaffa, there at the top, who has a memo that I know quite a bit about that influenced some of this as well. But that's going to be a topic for another day, the Jaffa memo. So this report came out, and then Nixon did nothing with it. And so from their point of view, all the population control people, it just had more or less died on the vine. But unbeknownst to them, he told Henry Kissinger to study this. And so sometime in 1974, I think he actually may have been, I think I may have read, my memory says that conversations began in 1973, but this says 1974. They studied it, and they came out with their proposals. And yes, it's true, Nixon didn't implement them because he was impeached and whatnot, but Gerald Ford did. So let's talk about some of the things that are in here. The actual plan, as it were, We're going to come back to that. Yes, Hugh Moore. Is that different? Hugh Moore is the guy. Who is the other guy? And so was the other guy the inventor, but this is the guy who owned the company? I bet you that was it. Something like that. Okay. All right. The other guy invented it. But Hugh Moore is the one that... Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. I knew Dixie Cup was definitely in there. Hugh Moore. Having flashbacks. Okay. So let me just go through some of this other data here that I've got, because this is going to factor in just a little bit. Let's get rid of that. And let's just move this off to the side for a minute. This is not in the report, although stuff like this is. The top chart here is the doubling time. And all these people that I've quoted, they all talk about the doubling time and how much trouble that they're going to be in. And this chart here, so there's 5 million. Dang it, I need a pointer. I need a pointer. I'm going to make a pointer for the next time. In 8000 BC, 5 million. And then 1650, you're at, took 200 years. Then 80 years, then 45 years. And now, according to them, the number that I saw, I think it may have been in the NSSM-200 one, was that there was a theoretical possibility of like 103 billion people. And they say even the pro-natalists would admit that that's too many people, which is interesting. If this chart doesn't quite do it, there's that Ehrlich name. Remember I told you about the Ehrlich name? But look at the other source on there, the World Bank. Gives you some idea of who's going to be involved in these things. So let's get rid of doubling time. Oop, wrong one. Get rid of that one. A better way to see it visually. And it's kind of interesting because you've got people like Elon Musk that are talking about how the fertility rate's going down, and then you got this whole other group of people who are looking at the overall population size and how it's doubling and growing, and they're like having heart attacks. Like they do not see any good news in this. This is like a terrible, terrible number to them. So that's what it looks like roughly over time. And so I guess their concern was the only way that this trajectory could continue is if bad things happen to people. Wars, famines, plagues, that kind of thing. And so they really do believe that they are the humanitarian ones by trying to find a humane way to reduce the population size. If you want another example of how in the 70s they were just immersed in this whole mindset, the movie Soylent Green. That would be a good one. I've got another one here, right here. Some of you might recognize the name. This is fiction. Same idea. Yeah, so this was everywhere. But now, because there's federal money and because Nixon had given a federal blessing to it, it was time to really pull it together. Let's do something. Let's get a plan. And NSSM-200 is the plan, at least the first one. And I appear to Where'd it go? Yeah. Jamie. Not that one. Lordy. Stinking unprofessional hack. Ah, there it is. So, there's just so much to say about all of this. I do have about 20 minutes left. We can get through quite a bit of it, but I'm going to try to hit the high notes. So I went through and sort of skimmed it again today to refresh my memory here. Okay, so page 7 we'll go to first. I'm going to skip right to the policy recommendations, which are repeated several times. Page 7. And you're going to have trouble seeing this or reading this. You don't have to read it, I guess. It'd be easier if I just read it. Problem is my eyes aren't good enough to read it that well. So I'm going to try to highlight the area that I'm looking at, though. That's what I'll do. I'll highlight it here, and then I'll read it from the book that I have in front of me. So this is from the summary. Okay, I'm gonna take my glasses off to read it, and it's a summary, so it does a good job of telling you what the rest of this report's going to say. International cooperation. These are ideas that they want to impose on LDCs, less developed countries. Improved healthcare and nutrition to reduce child mortality. Okay. Education and improve social status for women. Doesn't sound so bad, right? Increase female employment. Improved old age security. Assistance for the rural poor, who generally have the highest fertility, with blah, 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 blah. So those are the basic 5 ideas there. And obviously you can't complain too much about reducing child mortality, right? But let's see if, as we go on, we find things that we don't like as much. So on page 9 is the reference to Malthus, right there. Then at the bottom of page 9, we hear them very explicitly state the goal. While specific goals in this area are difficult to state, our aim should be for the world to achieve a replacement level of fertility, a 2-child family on average, by about the year 2000. So there it is. And 2000, by the way, was always the time frame that they're always looking at. They've kind of figured that if they didn't get things figured out by the year 2000, none of us were really going to be alive after that, or something or another. Going on, initially, technically speaking, strictly speaking, this report was a national security report, and so it was supposed to be aimed at other countries. So these are things that they were going to do to other countries. And after they looked at all of the countries of the world, these are the ones that they decided to focus on. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, Mexico, Indonesia, Brazil, the Philippines, Thailand, Egypt, Turkey, Ethiopia, and Colombia. Should sometime, if you go read about the population control actions of those countries during this time, funded by our money. But India is really the sort of the worst case, because these people, I told you, I get really angry with them. I mean, I really hate them. Like these people, they said, like every other word is like, well, this will all be voluntary. We're not going to do any coercion. We're just going to persuade people. When Gerald Ford did his signing memo, he's like, well, okay, we're going to do it, but make sure we don't step on people's toes, that kind of thing. And then when you go and look at how this is deployed in India, you're like, holy crap, man, we had a part in that. I mean, just terrible stuff. I'm not saying like Nazi level stuff, but really, really atrocious. Funded by our money. USAID. Heard of them? Anyway. So, next page. This is sort of a rehash of what I already said. So what they did was they sort of, from their point of view, is they didn't have enough data to really show all the different ways of reducing the population size. So they settled on the ones that they did have evidence for. So there are other ideas that were on the table, so to speak, that were pursued in other places and in other times. But at least in this document, were generally set aside in favor of these ones that I have highlighted. I've highlighted this one because it adds just a few things more than the first one did that I said. So here we got minimal levels of education, especially for women, reducing infant mortality, expanding wage employment, especially for women. And then we talked about finding a different way. They had some sort of a caveat about old age and security. It's because, historically speaking, people didn't have retirement plans, or they didn't have Social Security, right? The way that things generally worked was you had families that took care of each other. And that sounds just evil, doesn't it? I mean, that's a horrible idea. Families taking care of families. No. We've got to get the government involved. Let the government take care of the old people. It'll be much better. Much better until COVID comes along and you lock the old people up into rooms where they're all by themselves and they slowly die and no loved ones are able to see them. But, let's let the government be in charge of the old people or something. Whatever. I might be bitter or something. At any rate, they recognize that people were having children because the old way of doing things was when you got older, your kids took care of you. And so if you didn't have any kids, you were kind of in trouble. And, it's possible you might have quite a few kids because, well, you don't want to be, you don't want to overwhelm just one kid, right? So you want to have a smattering of kids, 4, 5, 6 kids, that they all can take care of you. Maybe one of them will die. Maybe you'll have a kid that doesn't like you and he's not going to take care of you anyway. So people would have lots of kids. So they said, we've got to create a system where people would turn to the government, right? So I bet you can start seeing some ideas of some policies that resonate with that. The next one, increasing income of the poorest. Yeah, I mean, who could say no to that, I guess. And then the last item, education of new generations on the desirability of smaller families. So that's there you go. I can almost just stop right there and then just ask the question, okay, how do they do that? So that's their plan. What do you think that they did? Did they just set the plan aside? All done, we're not going to do it. Or did they actually try to do this and do things? What's really ironic is I have a book about by a proponent of NSSM-200 who actually says that nothing came of it. They tried, and stinking Catholics, the Catholics stopped them, according to him. The Catholics stopped them from implementing the best ideas, if you want to believe that. But the proof is in the pudding. The population has declined. The fertility rate has dropped below replacement rate. So, like I said, proof is in the pudding. It happened. How did it happen? Just by accident? No. Hopefully I'll have a little bit of time to talk about some of that stuff. At any rate, there's their vision. That's what they want to do. They have there's no hesitation in their mind. Like, is it good and noble and right to encourage people to have smaller families? Is it their prerogative? They're experts, I suppose, right? So if they say you should have a smaller family, it must be good. It must be right. I mean, the audacity and arrogance of these people just sickens me. They just disgust me. Anyway, I'm getting myself worked up. Let me skip that one here. Yeah, so I made it clear that this memo, the whole thing here, this is all the memo, was geared towards the LDCs, the less developed countries, as national security type thing. But they were aware in several places in the document itself. They were aware that if these countries, I showed you them before, the 8 of them or whatever, find out that they're being targeted for depopulation, that's not going to go over very well. So plus they also knew that it was a global problem from their point of view, not just those countries. Those were just the tip of the spear. So this is a very important thing. It's right in here. People who say, "Well, that we only did that to the other countries." These aren't things that we did to ourselves. That's right here. It is important to demonstrate to LDC leaders that such family planning programs have worked. Oh, I'm doing an idiot. It's the first 3 sentences. Told you I can't read. Caution must be taken that in any approaches in this field we support in the LDCs are ones we can support within this country. So this is one of several times where they go out of their way to say, whatever we do to those countries, beginning with the LDCs, beginning with the rest of the world also, we're going to do here in America too. We're going to do it right here. So it's not limited. It's not limited to Ethiopia after all. It could be Ethiopia, it could be Illinois. Let's see here. A lot of this sort of ends up repeating some of the same stuff, and I don't feel like we need to repeat too much. But let me, oh yeah, this is a good one. This is just a side point here. I told you these people are right like a clock, broken clock. 2 times a day. Here's a great one. So this is concern about climate change. We hear a lot about climate change, and if you really dive into the population controllers today, they're always talking about climate change and how people are the leading drivers of climate change. And I have a whole book. It's called Moving Upstream. I can see it right there. Look it up. Moving Upstream. Like her whole point is climate change is so bad, but no one wants to talk about the real problem, which is the people. But this one says it's not global warming, it's global cooling. Climatic changes are poorly understood, but a persistent atmospheric cooling trend since 1940 has been established. So in the 1970s, it was global cooling that all the experts were worried about. Anyway, I said this was just an aside, and it is. I'm not going to focus on that too much. I wanted to. There was lots of good stuff in here. By good, I mean like satanic. I'll have to definitely talk about this again sometime. Let me touch on this because it's pretty important for what I'm going to say after this. And somebody texted me. Let's just see if that's anything important. Not important right now. So that we had the summary before. Now they're diving into more details on things. So I'm just going to summarize this here. Essentially, what they're saying is we've got to get women into the workforce. And this is such a really good example of why I hate these people. So they're weighing this thing. Well, right? You can see the reasoning there. The status and utilization of women in LDC societies, but I've already explained that everything they want to do internationally, they want to do in America too. Is important in reducing family size. For women, this is the second paragraph, employment outside the home offers an alternative to early marriage and childbearing, and an incentive to have fewer children after marriage. The woman who must stay home to take care of her children must forego the income she could earn outside the home. Now, if you're a woman who's reading that, you might have a job and you might like your life, and I'm not saying anything about. I don't have any objections to women working, not in principle or anything like that. But why does the woman want to work? Is it because she wants to work, or is it because society has given her the idea? Society, meaning the federal government, through curriculum additions in their 1st through 8th grade elementary school curriculum, through things that they see on TV and in the media, blah, blah, blah. Is that why she wants to work? Because she thinks that she has to. Because these bastards know that if they can get a woman to take a job, then they don't have to coerce her to have fewer children. She's just going to make the decision kind of on her own. Circumstances will dictate, well, I can't really have the job and have too many kids. I have to buy a bigger vehicle. We might need a bigger house, and we can't really afford it, and things like that. And that's exactly the kinds of scenarios that these social engineers wanted to create. They wanted to thrust women into a different role, and do not for a minute think that they cared one lick about women. They couldn't give a about the women. I already have alluded, they don't even like people. If they could do it, if they could get rid of all of us, a lot of these people would. They would just let the earth, let nature take over. If within their power, they would just get rid of all people. They don't care about people. They don't care about women. They care about perfecting the machine. They want to get the machine going just right. And so the next part there, you can see the way their little brains work. Well, if we flood the market with women who are working, well, now we have another problem. We must take into account the overall demand for labor, because now you're taking away, and if it's not here, there's other places in here. Now you're taking the jobs away from men, which, again, I don't really necessarily care. I don't have strong feelings about those kinds of things. But let's just, again, recognize the way the reality kind of works. What happens when you have more of something? Prices go down, right? So if you have more workers, wages goes down. So now when you had a scenario in the 50s when you could have a single wage earner provide for the well-being of the entire family, now you incentivize and create an atmosphere and pressures and actually try to engineer people's lives so that they can't survive unless both people are working. The net result is actually both people are working, but they're still only making as much as one person made in the 50s. This is perfect for them. They love this stuff. This is great. You got a whole society just humming along. I'm talking about the rich people, the social engineers. They've got people to go out there and clean their toilets and mow their lawns while they sit in their little rooms and work with numbers. And if we increase the amount of this population group by 5% through propaganda, then we might be able to take a little bit of an edge off of the pressure on this group, and just tweak the machine ever so slightly. We're just cogs in the machine to these people, and I hate them. Did I mention that? So anyway, I kind of got thrown off on a little tangent here. I need to skip ahead. It sort of ties into that. I'm going to end up going over here. So if I lose some of you, I thank you for staying with me. But I do at least, I'm going to run out of time according to my schedule. And I want to definitely hit some things. So maybe we can pick it up later. But I still have 3 minutes technically. So this is, they are aware that abortion is the hottest potato they could possibly touch. But the authors of this want to go out of their way. They want it to be absolutely understood. No country has reduced its population growth without resorting to abortion. So there it is. Did you think that the people at this time who advocated for abortion on demand were concerned about a woman's right, or women being educated, or women being employed? No, none of those things. They did not give a rat's ass about those things. They wanted abortion as an option to reduce the population. In fact, if you read the actual decision, the Roe v. Wade decision, the justice who wrote it actually makes an allusion to how there are people who are advocating for abortion as a population control type measure. It's actually like in there. Like I said, we don't think about this stuff now because we're so detached from it. But at the time, this is everyone. It was going on, man. Anyway, they wanted abortion as a major important tool for reducing the population. They wanted women in schools and in colleges in particular because they wanted to delay childbearing, like radically delay it as long as possible, and then let nature take its course, because they know that when a family delays having children, they will have fewer children just because of nature. Because when you get to, say, age 35, the woman's biological clock makes it a little bit harder for women to have children. They know that. They knew that. They were counting on it. They wanted it. They liked it. Like, these are the kinds of people we're talking about here. If a woman got to be the age of at 50, for example, well past the time when she could have children, and suddenly she realizes, oh man, I messed it up. I've got 2 kids. I love them. I think I really wish I could have had 4 or 5. Well, the age of 50 is too late. It just is. I mean, yeah, you can do adoption and things like that. But that is exactly the kinds of things that they wanted to engineer. And let me give you just a little bit of evidence for how this was implemented. And I told you I'm going to go over, and I already warned you of that, but I am going to try to be quick about it at least. Okay. So NSSM-200 was, Nixon passed on it. Ford signed it with caveats. Carter continued it. 1977, it was time to bring together the entire National Security Council to talk about, okay, how are we going to do this? This is their first meeting. Now, the reason why I wanted you to see this, because I don't have the time to go through it, certainly not today, and detail every policy thing that they did. I just don't. Look who was involved. Look who was involved in implementing these policies. You had Department of State, okay. Department of Treasury, interesting. Wonder what they may have done to reduce the population. The Department of Defense, that's an interesting person to have there representing the depopulation movement. Department of Agriculture, interesting. Department of Commerce, what are they all doing? What do these people have to do with anything? This is not family planning. These are it's almost like all of society type stuff here, right? Agency for AID, yeah. We all know what AID, right? Economic affairs, environmental quality. The only thing that's not on here, I wonder if they came, well, right, there would not be the Department of Education, because Department of Education didn't come until 79. I'm going to find, this group continued to meet until I believe 1981. So I'm going to see if the Department of Education ever shows up. I bet you they do. But you see the U.S. Information Agency. So in other words, they got together, all of the main actors of the federal government, and said, okay, we've been given the mandate to depopulate the country. How are we going to do it? And they began making plans. And they produced other reports and things of that sort too. I should have set out a book. The basic conclusion that they came to, we've already hinted at. There's a really great book if you want to really dive into some of the specific policies. It's called Intended Consequences. I forget his name, the author's name, very quickly. And the guy goes through the actual policies that were deployed and why. And he shows that they really wanted to elevate women and their educational capabilities and in the workplace, because it was that's the main thing that they ended up choosing. They had lots of things, and they did employ quite a few of them, but the big one, the one that they poured the money into, was getting women to go to college, to get married late, to have children late, and to enter the workforce. And they said the argument was, this was the argument, well, we can do that and we can get away with it because who would ever criticize that? Like someone who was, if someone were to politically say that women should not go to college, should not have a job, that person would be crucified 6 ways from Sunday, right? There's no way that that person ever survives. And note, I am not saying that either, because, well, I actually believe I'm a libertarian. If people want to do it, then let people do it, but don't trick them into doing it. Don't align all the cogs of the machine to churn out things, to put people into situations. You create the situation, and then they choose their way out of it, and they're in a bad situation, right? The economy is poor. They can't seem to find a job. You create that, or we'll give you this example. The housing market, prices are high. One of the ideas that they actually said in 1969, one of the ideas about how to reduce the size of the population is to make it very difficult for people to own their own homes. Why? Because if you own your own home, then you have a certain amount of autonomy, right? But you're also able to do certain things, like if you have another kid, you can add on, you can make another room. But if you have to rent, then you can't add on, right? And if you have another kid and you have a 2-bedroom apartment, but now you need a 3-bedroom, it's going to cost you a lot more. And so what do people do? They're in this situation where they can't afford the house, and they can't afford the greater, the more expensive apartment. So they say to themselves, right? Well, I guess we just really can't have another kid right now. We really want to, but we just can't. It just wouldn't be responsible. They're not the ones that created that situation. These social engineers created that situation. And then they let people voluntarily choose their way out of it. So Machiavellian. Oh, man. Anyway, that book, The Intended Consequences, they say, he basically puts his finger on it. They chose this strategy because they knew that it worked, and they knew that it did 2 things at once. And the thing that they wanted it to do would be condemned, but the other effect of it, women going to college, no one could say no to. I mean, who would? No, I'm not saying no to it now. And so they were able to do it. They were able to get away with it. And we're continuing to live with that. So these agencies, one of the big agencies involved here was AID, and they continue to do things with that money for a long time. I was going to talk about this guy. Oh, I have it. So this was the head of AID at the time. He would give out condoms as business cards. Gives you kind of some idea. But to have an idea of the kind of guy we're talking about here, I'm going to cover up my head so I can this paragraph here. If governments, and he's talking about foreign governments here, said no to family planning assistance, air quotes, he got NGOs to implement USAID-supported family planning activities. If a physician-dominated health program did not make family planning easily available, then he would use community-based and social marketing programs. If couples said no to existing methods, he'd create new ones. In other words, this is a guy who set the pattern for every other government bureaucrat. If the politicians in the society says, don't do that, he'd go around them somehow, and he'd find a way to do it. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. And so that's kind of a little bit why I'm saying, like, if you really want to tackle this issue of declining fertility rates or whatever, you have to look at the people who created the situation for people to, quote, voluntarily choose to have fewer children, right? And if you you might be thinking, I'm going to wrap this up, even though I got tons more I wanted to say. See, it's always like that. Lord Almighty. I'm gonna force myself to say it. And I need to give the recap. So Reagan came, and that pretty much, that all of the public talk about depopulation kind of went away. I don't think Reagan was necessarily against it. George H. Bush actually, believe it or not, was for it. I have a juicy quote from him in favor of depopulation. Not George W., but George H. For political reasons, he would get rid of that. But Reagan, he just didn't have time for it. It wasn't anything that he wanted to be a part of. So he just refused to fund it. And yeah, people like Ravenholt went around him, and so a lot of that, a lot of the foreign programs and the domestic programs for depopulation did continue in their own way. But this document, I read on Wikipedia, this document was, Wikipedia says 85, it entered the public. I thought it was 89, and this actually says in here that it was declassified in 89. Yeah, declassified on July 3rd, 1989. So you had almost 15 years of government policy aimed at depopulating the world and the country. And it was completely secret and hidden from the American public. The story of how it was finally forced to come out is pretty interesting too. But the point is, you had a full decade, the 1980s, really, for these people to put in place the mechanisms and the institutions and all the things. And who's having the children right now? It's the people who were born in the 80s and the 90s and or the 2000s, right? They're the ones who grew up under the influence of the propaganda and all the stuff that these people were trying to create. So you think that they didn't, let's say, no, it didn't work. No, that's just poppycock. I'm just going to leave you with this, just to wrap it up here. This is from the CDC. They sum it up. You can see all the Malthusian sort of stuff here. They talk about all the things. The CDC in 1999 listed bringing down the fertility rate as one of its greatest achievements. Now, you might say, in your own mind, that no, all the decisions I made, they were all mine. They were not coerced. I was not the result of, I didn't make decisions because of propaganda or the way the culture made me think or anything like that. The federal government and the CDC is taking credit for it. They think they did it. They call it one of its greatest achievements. So you need to have a talk with them. See if there's any contraception. I can send you this link. It hasn't exactly been scrubbed from the CDC website, but I'm using the archive.com Wayback Machine to make sure that it doesn't completely disappear. Okay, so where does this leave us? So I think I've made it clear that I don't necessarily have an objection to women working. This is not about, I'm not talking about women. Like I said, I think these people hate all people. But I think that we should not take the federal government on its face, or any government on its face for that matter, when it makes a proposal or sets out a policy. We have ample evidence to believe now that it is very possible that if they're giving us policy, they're selling us a policy, that the reasons for why they're encouraging that policy have nothing to do with values that we would approve of. You know what I mean? Like if they had said, we're going to encourage women to go to college. I'm just using this as an example. We're going to encourage women to go to college because we don't want them to have babies. Can you see that playing very well in any newspaper anywhere? No, it's not going to fly, right? So just imagine like anything that comes out, any kind of policy, whatever it be. The federal government says, we want you to make sure that you recycle 3 cans of soda every day. Something totally neutral. Okay, why are you doing this or whatever? You can't, I'm just saying you can't take it on its face. They probably want you to recycle it because they probably discovered that aluminum is the way to create cold fusion and we can have unlimited energy in our own homes, but not if we have the aluminum and they're going to take it from us. And that's pretty cynical and pretty conspiratorial crazy. I understand that. I recognize that. But that's kind of the idea that I'm talking about. Anything that they say, anything that they do, there could be a secret policy being drafted right now, or during the Biden administration, or during the Obama administration, that is actually has been implemented and signed into law by the president through an EO that our federal bureaucrats are implementing that we don't even know about. And we might not know about for another 10 years. That's exactly what happened with NSSM-200. And it's pretty audacious, pretty arrogant to me. And that's why I think we should radically scale back the federal government, take away as much money from them as we can, and just let people live their own lives. Let chips fall where they may. If people want to have 2 kids, let them have 2 kids. If they want to have 10 kids, let them have 2 kids. Don't be like creating propaganda to try to tell them, educate them on family size or anything. Mind your own effing business. Get out of it. Just stay away. Just go away. And stop funding Planned Parenthood while we're at it. So I got a little worked up there, and there are some quotes that I didn't read that would have really got me riled up. So I'm well over time. You can get NSSM-200 on my website, NSSM200.com. You can find it on gutenbookpress.com. It is on Amazon. There are links in the description to Amazon or Gutenbook Press, but you can download it for free off of the NSSM-200 website. I think that if we could get this into Elon Musk's hands, it could be useful. I think he knows that our federal government's involved in these things. But there might even still be he might just be a little bit naive still on just how deep these things go. And the worldviews that created the institutions that we're living within today. I mentioned the housing market. I don't believe it's an accident that houses cost so much. I think it's intentional. I think it's designed. I don't know that, but if we had full transparency, I think that a lot of the conspiracies that we think that are out, that we know the conspiracies are out there, things that we think might be true, if we had the actual documents, all of them, I bet you our hair would stand on end. We'd be just absolutely and utterly disgusted to find out what they're doing all the time. So I don't know what my topic's going to be for Thursday. I think I'm going to try to think of something a little bit more cheery, something that doesn't get me self-triggered. That'd be bad. I haven't asked for questions. I haven't seen really any either, but just real quick, we've only got a couple. I'm well over time. Does anyone have any questions that they want to? I'll let you do it real quick. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the sign off, and thank you for watching this. Thank you for being with me tonight. I really appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Give me topic ideas. Help me find some guests. All that stuff. And okay, well, it's time to bid farewell with the new exit song.